There were two young children that were out riding their bicycles. And as fate would have it, they run across a body. This was a body of a human being.
When bodies started appearing along highways in central Florida, it wasn't immediately obvious that an active serial killer was on the loose.
It took law enforcement quite a while to make a determination that it was a female that we were looking for.
Aileen Wuornos, known as America's first female serial killer.
With each victim, the rage increased a little bit more. Her next victim was shot 6 times. The victim after that was shot 9 times. She actually emptied the gun at him.
Wuornos posed as a hitchhiker, luring wealthy men off the highway for sex before killing and robbing them.
She was a predator. She was out finding her victims. It wasn't a lover's quarrel. It wasn't family related. She was actually a predator.
You got somebody out there that's killed 7 people. If that's not incentive enough to bust your ass and do your job and catch them, then you don't need to be a cop.
Our patrol division had come upon a vehicle that was abandoned on I-75. It was in the southbound lane on the shoulder. It had a flat tire. And when they ran the VIN number on the vehicle, it came back to David Spears, who had been reported a missing person. Our patrol division contacted me and asked what they should do with the vehicle. Because it was an active investigation for the missing person.
Construction worker David Spears was last seen by his son leaving work at midday on May the 19th. When the 43-year-old didn't turn up to meet his ex-wife, David was reported missing.
We advised the patrol division to secure the scene, and we brought a team of detectives up there. Now, there was no real evidence in the car, but we noticed that there was property that was missing.
On June the 1st, 1990, a naked body was found along Route 19. Dental records identified it as being that of David Spears.
The body was found in Citrus County, so they were working the actual homicide end of it. David Spears was shot 6 times, but that was our involvement recovering the vehicle.
With the David Spears homicide investigation taking place in neighbouring Citrus County, the Marion County Sheriff's Office had no more to do with the case until another vehicle was found abandoned.
There was one other vehicle we recovered on I-75, and it was a similar set of circumstances where he had been reported missing. And our patrol division came upon the car. Again, it was abandoned on the side of the interstate, so we secured it and searched the scene.
The vehicle belonged to Charles Kascaden, a 40-year-old part-time rodeo worker.
He was traveling back from St. Louis. He had been up there visiting his mother, and he drove back from St. Louis to the Tampa area where he was living with his fiancée.
Charles's body was found in Pasco County.
The victim was shot 9 times.
Personal effects were removed from him, personal items as well that were eventually found in a pawn shop over in Daytona.
It wasn't long before another abandoned vehicle appeared.
It was around the July 4th weekend. And we had received a telephone call through our 911 center that a vehicle had crashed in the community of Orange Springs, Florida. And walking away from that vehicle were 2 women. We have deputies that go to the crime scene, and the vehicle obviously had been crashed. What was noteworthy was that the tag had been removed from that vehicle.
When we got up there, we found that it belonged to another missing person, Peter Sims, when we ran the VIN number. And we thought maybe he was up there somewhere.
Peter Sims was a 65-year-old missionary from Jupiter, Florida, who'd left his home a month earlier to visit family.
His intent was to drive up to New Jersey to pay his brother a visit. And from there, he had planned on going over to Arkansas and visit his mom. He had a number of Bibles in the car with him. He was going to pass them out along the way. But he never made it to New Jersey.
Peter Sims had seemingly vanished into thin air.
It was a long time that we spent up there, looking for Peter Sims' body, looking for any type of evidence.
Just 26 days later, the Marion County Sheriff's Office received a call about a local man who hadn't returned home from work.
Troy Burrus was from here in Marion County, Florida. He worked for a sausage delivery company called Gilchrist Sausage. And early in the morning, his truck was loaded up and he used to go out on the delivery route. He had made some of his deliveries.
This route took him out to Daytona Beach, and he made stops along the way. And then when he got to Daytona, he headed north up into Ormond Beach. Made a few stops up there, turned around, started coming back. And somewhere along the way, when he was returning to the plant, he disappeared.
He never returned home that evening from his shift. And the family reported him overdue, missing.
We were able to isolate the location to an area known as Seville, which is about midway between Daytona Beach and Ocala. We put out what we call a bolo, be on the lookout for. His truck, we started looking for it, and about 2 o'clock the next morning, one of our deputies came upon his truck, and it had been abandoned at the intersection of State Route 40 and 19, which was out in the Ocala National Forest, a very isolated area. So at this point, we have another missing person. We have no idea what happened to him. A few days later, a couple of people came up from the Space Coast area, which is down around Cocoa Beach. They were looking to have a picnic at one of our large lakes out in the Ocala National Forest. When they got there, it was extremely busy. The parking was gone, and they didn't want to fight with the crowds. They just wanted to have a quiet little picnic lunch. So they continued north about 3 miles, and they found a small fire lane that went off into the woods. And it went into the forest, maybe a half, 3/4 of a mile. They stopped at a little clearing they thought would be big enough to have their lunch at. And when they got out of the car, 2 things really happened at that point. They noticed the air didn't smell fresh. There was something unique about it. And the other thing was, off in the distance in the weeds, they could see something that just didn't seem like it fit, because everything else around them was green. This was blue. They walked over to look, and it was a pair of jeans. The pair of jeans were on a decomposing body. So they contacted us, and we went up there, and we recovered the body. Fortunately, he still had his work shirt on. So on his pocket, it said Gilchrist Sausage, and it said Troy, his first name. So we now knew who we had, and it made it a little bit easier to confirm it.
5 days after his disappearance, detectives had to break the news to Troy's family. He'd been shot twice at point-blank range.
Now we had our first body in Marion County. And on cases like this, you try and work the investigation from the time the body's found backwards, so that you can look at their last moments and where they might have been, what they might have done. We did a road check at the location that his truck had been found at, stopping motorists, talking to them to see if there had been anything that out of the ordinary. Maybe somebody saw his truck or saw somebody with it. And the only thing we came out of that with was there was one individual that reported seeing a hitchhiker. And they said this hitchhiker was hitching north from where the truck was abandoned up somewhere into the Ocala forest. We found out who the hitchhiker was, and we interviewed him, and that turned out to be a dead lead. We also ran his route. We actually left the delivery plant at the same time he did, 6:20 in the morning. We stopped at every location he went to, every store, every supermarket. We went all the way out to Daytona, up into Ormond, came back. That was how we isolated where he was last seen. When we got to Seville, we talked to the clerk there, and the clerk said he was here just like normal. It was just his regular delivery day. When we went to his next stop, he had never arrived there. So that was how we isolated the location. So we knew a little bit about what was going on in Citrus County with the investigation into David Spears, and Pasco County with Charles Kascaden, because we had recovered the vehicles, but we still weren't in the loop, as it were. If things had been done differently, maybe the ballistics would have shown us a match and we could have tied it together. But because of the way the state was organized at the time, regionalized I should say, we didn't come upon that connection. We followed up on a lot of leads, we tried to come up with a lot of information, but we were just coming up empty-handed. And I can remember how frustrating it was, just coming up with nothing time after time again. But what really tied things together was that when Troy Burrus was killed, the detective that was assigned to the case as the lead investigator in Marion County, he started going through bulletins for unsolved homicides in the state. And he came upon these 2 cases, and he looked at the circumstances involving Citrus County and Pasco County, and he said, well, they all involve a .22. Maybe there's something here. So the 3 detectives got together from those 3 agencies, and they compared notes. And they found that there was a lot more to compare than just the .22 caliber connection. There were the vehicles that had been recovered had a lot of similarities. The license plates had been removed. The inside of the vehicles had been wiped clean. In some of them you could see the streaks from where they had wiped it. Items had been taken from the vehicle, and the vehicles were left on abandoned major roadways usually. So there were a lot of similarities now. And we started looking at it saying, could these be tied together? Now, at this particular time, we had the Gainesville murders. A lot of panic because of the way the bodies were found, the way things turned up. There was a lot of panic in Gainesville over this. We didn't want to jump to any conclusions and say, okay, we have yet another serial killer in Central Florida. So we wanted to work it a little farther to try and tie things together a little bit better so that we could know what we had before we jumped to a conclusion.
Just 39 days after the discovery of Troy Burrus' body, the Marion County Sheriff's Office received another call.
I was the homicide detective on call that week. There were 2 young children that were out in this undeveloped subdivision riding their bicycles. And as fate would have it, they run across a body. And when they realized this was a body of a human being, they pedaled home. They told their parents. Their parents called 911 to notify law enforcement. A uniformed patrol, deputies arrived. They secured the crime scene from any further contamination. And then I was contacted by our communications center. Once I received the call, I traveled to the location, which is in southwest Marion County, Florida, just off of I-75. And it was there I had my first contact with the remains of Richard Humphreys. When I arrived at the Humphreys crime scene, it was late in the evening. It had not yet gotten dark, but we worked literally all night long. You could tell that he had been there for a little while. You could also tell that his pockets had been turned inside out. That's indicative of robbery. And an initial examination of his remains indicated that he had been shot multiple times, some in the back, some in the front. And what was most significant from the gunshot wounds was the physical evidence that suggested that one of the injuries, or the gunshot injury, was what we call a close non-contact gunshot wound, meaning that when the weapon was discharged, it was only just a few inches from his body. And that particular gunshot wound was to his chest. When you looked at his clothing, he had some stains on his knees. You had evidence that would suggest that he was probably moving around, flailing on the ground. And to take a long shot here, I'm going to say that was the last gunshot wound. And I hate to say it this way, but that was to put him out of his misery. We were not able to identify Mr. Humphreys immediately. So for us, he was a John Doe. We had no idea who he was. We checked our databases. No one fitting his description had been reported missing. Then we started to check with adjoining counties to see if anyone fitting his description had been reported missing. And it was late that evening that we had learned from the Sumter County, Florida Sheriff's Office that they had actually taken a missing persons report of Richard Humphreys. 2 detectives from the Sumter County Sheriff's Office who personally knew Mr. Humphreys eventually responded to our location, and a personal identification was made by these detectives of the remains of Mr. Humphreys. Once we got that information, it allowed us to really jump into this thing with both feet. Now we knew who he was, we knew where he worked, and we spoke with his supervisor, and we had learned that he was an investigator for the state of Florida working in protective services, specifically child abuse and neglect investigations. He was a retired military person. After his distinguished career within the military, he went into law enforcement, and eventually he became a police chief in a small town called Sylacauga, Alabama. Once the investigative team learned that, it was pretty tough. It was one of our own that was a victim of a homicide. But you can't let that impact your objectivity in working this case. Your job is to go out, identify any and all evidence connected, and then identify who was responsible for this case, and then bring that person to justice. We were able to gather his schedule for the days prior, the people that he was to make contact with. We were able to go interview those people to see if he did make contact with them. We were working on putting together a timeline so we could piece together if we had to, minute by minute, the travels of Mr. Humphreys for those last 24 hours of his life. The following morning, I broke away from the interviews and I traveled to the office of the medical examiner where I personally attended the autopsy of Mr. Humphreys. And basically, that was a very crucial part of the investigation because we examined the body head to toe, front to back. We're looking for literally everything: hairs, fibers, trace evidence, anything that would be indicative of a struggle that had taken place. And also, we were able to absolutely determine that he had been shot multiple times.
Despite an extensive and thorough investigation, the Marion County Sheriff's Office was struggling to find out what happened to Richard Humphreys.
We had no idea. We had no leads. We had no suspects. We had no idea who the killer was in his case.
By the time Mr. Humphreys was killed, we had thought about there being a connection. So we had contacted every agency in Central Florida, whether it was on a local, state, or federal level. And we said, let's come in and meet, let's talk, let's share ideas, let's find out something. And I can remember my hope was that somebody had information that we didn't, because we didn't know anything. We were almost in the dark on this, and it was very frustrating.
And then just a matter of a couple of weeks later, we're actually having a meeting at our office and comparing the cases.
So my hope was that somebody had some information. When everybody came in, we found out they did. Volusia County had the first killing, and we hadn't accounted for that yet because it was 6 months earlier. So we actually missed the first one. Now this was drawn into the mix. Now information's coming together.
Detectives learned that on December the 13th, 1989, the body of 51-year-old Richard Mallory was found in a wooded area.
Richard Mallory was found shot to death in Volusia County, Florida, over near Daytona. He was an electronics shop repairman. His body was found, it was very decomposed.
Richard's car had been found abandoned 13 days earlier.
It was literally that case that said, Houston, we have a problem. You know, now we're starting to really connect these dots, connect these cases together. The biggest thing that we focused on was the victimology, the crime scene, and the associated evidence, such as the victim shot multiple times with a small caliber weapon. It was too much to overlook.
Detectives hoped this new, likely connected case would lead them to the killer.
There were a couple things that led us into believing that we were possibly looking for women. Some other things came into play that we started looking at. Number one, the fact that it was a smaller caliber weapon. 22 caliber, lighter weapon, not as much kickback. That might be something a woman would use. Number two, every vehicle had the driver's side seat in the forwardmost position when we recovered it. So now we're thinking, okay, maybe we are looking at somebody that's shorter or smaller. Smaller gun, smaller person, and maybe we are in fact looking for women. And we didn't know, but it was just a line of thought that we pursued. A lot of times when you're working a homicide investigation, you have leads to go on, you have witnesses, you have connections maybe with family or something. And in this case, we weren't coming up with any of that. And nationwide, when you look at your violent crimes, homicide has about the highest closure rate of any of the crimes that we have. So you would think you'd have something to work with. And time after time, these cases are coming in and we're getting nothing.
Once the homicide task force began to meet, there were so many ideas that were thrown on the table as to where we need to look. And one of the cases that the task force went back to look at was the case involving Peter Sims. And we were perplexed with that case because we had not located his body, but he was a middle-aged white male. And you had this vehicle that had been involved in a crash. The tag had been removed like the other victim's vehicle that we had identified and recovered. And the biggest piece of evidence in that case was we had eyewitnesses that seen these two females leaving the scene of that crash. And you have to give the investigator credit that worked the initial phases of that investigation, because he had these witnesses come to our office, met with our forensic artist, and composite sketches were created. Those sketches remained in the Sims case file for several months until the task force said, let's look at this case, look at the similarities.
We knew now we're looking at something that may be connected. We're trying again to connect the dots here. And then we had our 7th killing.
Walter Gino Antonio, he was murdered in November of 1990. And also, he had a law enforcement background. He was a reserve deputy sheriff with the Brevard County Sheriff's Office. And some of the things that were taken from him, personal effects, were like a set of handcuffs and a flashlight.
His body had been found in Dixie County. Up until this point, we were debating whether or not we wanted to release those composites. We had to decide as a team what we wanted to do. And we had to look at the pros and the cons. And on the side of the pros, if we release them, maybe we'll get some names, because we didn't even have names at this point. On the other side, we thought maybe there's going to be more panic if we release this. Maybe the girls will leave the area. If they see the news, maybe they'll go to another state and we'll never know who they were. Plus, the fact that the composite drawings that we were talking about releasing, we didn't have a body to go with them. Well, all we had was a missing person report. So we didn't know that we had that .22 caliber connection. It was just the other things about the man and his profile and his vehicle seemed similar. We said, let's go ahead and release it. We got to give it a try. We've got to get this to stop. And we hoped for the best.
A tip line number was set up. We actually had 2 detectives working around the clock in the room to answer these calls. We had literally thousands of telephone calls, and every single lead was documented on paper. It became part of the official police file. We
had to get a name. We had to get some information to tie it in. And the eureka moment came the first time we went public. Within the first hour of releasing these composites, we had a call that came in. It was item number 5, our 5th lead, that named Tyria and Aileen.
Aileen Wuornos and Tyria Moore were partners known to be in the Daytona Beach area. Detectives soon realised Wuornos used multiple aliases, including the name Lee.
The names of Tyria Moore and Lee Wuornos. That was just one of the leads in the pile of leads that we had. But when you go back, and hindsight being 2020, we got her name right out of the block.
Now we're on the right track. And in very short sequence, we had 3 other leads come in that also named the same girls. So now we knew there was something to that.
The red light goes off. When you have that many leads with the same names, we focused on that. And now we can start doing background checks on the names. We actually ran a background check on the Lee that we had with some of the aliases, and that's when we had learned that there was actually an outstanding arrest warrant for Lee Wuornos for a crime that had occurred years prior. So now we actually had a photograph to go with one of the names.
It showed us that they had ties to the locations that we were looking at. For example, one of the leads said that the girls had lived in Homosassa Springs, which is over on the west coast of Florida. But it indicated that they had left there, gone inland, which would have been Marion County, and then to the east coast, which was Daytona Beach. Things were starting to build now almost immediately. And it was just a matter of getting through all these leads that we're receiving, investigating them, coming up with enough information to say, this is it, and then finding the girls.
The investigation began to focus in Volusia County of Florida.
We reviewed the leads and determined that the most likely location to find her would be Daytona Beach. So a number of the undercover officers from all over the state went over to Daytona Beach in an attempt to locate her.
I gave him the name of Mike Joyner. He was unbelievably an instrumental part of this case.
They called me in to a meeting and said that they had found out that she was staying in Daytona or close to Daytona, and wanted me to go over there and see if I could find her in some of those biker bars over there.
We knew that they liked hanging out at the bars. So we figured that would be our best bet, was trying to find that type of location that they would hang out at and start looking there. And quite frankly, I think we got a little bit lucky.
The first time I saw her, it was in Port Orange. She was shooting pool. She had a bad scar on her forehead, and I had seen a picture of her. They had showed me, and she was very easy to tell it was her. Just got to know her from then on. They had given me some, money, and I started buying her beer and playing pool and buying her cigarettes, and just kind of hung together. But I knew I had her, and I knew I wasn't going to let it out of my sight.
We had hoped to be able to find Aileen and Tyria out in Daytona. We didn't expect to find her this quickly, though.
The last resort, that's where she said she wanted to go. I said, so that's where I want to go. So that's where we went. So we were shooting pool at the last resort, and she just went off, and I was bent down to make a shot, and she just hit me across the back with a pool stick. The woman had no sympathy for nobody. I looked up at her and said, why did you do that? And she said, honey, I don't know. It come over me. I have no reason, no explanation. And I said, let's try not to let that happen again. As we were in the bar, we were dancing, and I had plenty of money, and that's what she was interested in. She wanted to know if I wanted to go out one night and party and bring all my money. And I told her, I said, yeah, I'd love to go out, but I said, you stink. You ain't had a bath. And I don't know when, and I said, I stink. And I said, I ain't doing that. I'll go get a motel room and we'll clean up, but I ain't going out with no stinking ass woman. As an undercover officer, you never lose control. If you lose control, you've lost the situation. Did I get worried about it? No, she wasn't gonna kill me in the bar. I knew that I was not going off with her. I just went and got another beer and said, just whenever you get ready, I'm ready to go, let's go. Because I knew I'd already told them over the body wire that I wasn't going any further with this because I'm not gonna be the next victim. At that point, I went and got a motel room and come back. And when we walked out to my truck to go to the motel, is when they arrested us, because I figured at that point, when she told me, let's go party and bring all my money, I was probably gonna be her next victim.
Aileen Wuornos was arrested on January the 9th, 1991.
It was a relief. I think that's the best way to describe it.
I'm a Christian. I believe in the Lord Jesus Christ with all my heart. And I do believe that the Lord give every human a talent. And my talent was to do undercover work.
If she hadn't been caught, she would have kept killing. In fact, in her own words, when she wrote a letter to the court, that's what she said. She said she seriously hates human life and would kill again.
The next day, investigators tracked down Tyria Moore 900 miles away in Scranton, Pennsylvania.
There was no evidence that Tyria Moore was involved when these murders occurred. We can't deny that she knew about the murders because we learned from interviews from Tyria that she was told by Aileen Wuornos herself that she had killed these men.
When Aileen had met Tyria, Aileen thought, this is my soulmate. This is the person I want to spend the rest of my life with, and I will do anything for this girl.
A plan was hatched to try and turn Tyria against Wuornos.
She was very much in love with Tyria. That's all she talked about was her. And I knew that if you could get her to feeling sympathy for Tyria, you could get more from her. When we got Aileen and put her in jail, we come up with a plan to let's get Aileen and Tyria on the phone and talk. And I told Tyria I would sit there and write notes to her because I had been with Aileen and I kind of knew her mindset.
When Aileen was arrested, she was brought over to the Volusia County Jail. A decision was made to bring Tyria Moore back down and to use her as a witness. She was set up in a motel room We had a recorded line in there, and she got a letter to Aileen that in essence said, "Hey Lee, the police are here asking questions. I'm afraid of what's going on. I'm afraid I'm going to get in trouble. Can you call me? Here's the number I'm at."
So I sat there and wrote notes, and Tyria talked to Aileen on the phone. And then the next day is when she finally said, "I won't let you take any of the blame for it because you and I both know you had nothing to do with it." And she said, "I'm ready to talk to an investigator and confess."
So Lee called her from the jail, and we tape recorded, I think, 13 different phone calls between the girls.
"Lee, they're coming after me. I know they are."
No, they're not.
What?
I'm not going to go to jail or anything. If I have to confess, I will.
Okay. Yes. Why the hell did you do this? Why did you do this?
Listen, Ty.
Wait.
I'll probably never be able to see you.
Yes.
I love you. If I have to confess everything just to keep you from getting in trouble, I will.
Okay.
Don't worry, okay?
Okay.
I love you.
No. I'll do it now. Get it over with.
Right this very moment?
Yes. Get it over with.
All right.
Aileen kept reassuring Tyria, "If I have to confess, I will." She wanted her to know she was there for her, she was going to protect her. When they brought her in initially, they contacted a public defender to represent her before the questioning. And the public defender advised her not to talk to the police. And she said, I have to protect Tyria. And she came in and confessed.
Well, I came here to confess to you. I want to be straight up with one thing right there and now.
Sure.
The reason I'm confessing is there's not another girl. There is one girl.
Okay, so then what you're telling us is you're voluntarily coming forward to talk to us now.
Yeah, to let you know that I'm the one that did the killing.
I can't get any better when you catch her and they confess, and it's over with and it's done.
On January the 16th, 1991, Wuornos fully confessed to all 7 murders.
Most of the times I was drunk as hell. And I was a professional hooker. And these guys would take my ass, so when they started to get rough with me, I just opened up and fired on them. I was trying to make my money and go.
Now, Aileen played the victim. In fact, her initial confession, she was the victim for all of these. You know, they were attacking her, she was protecting herself, so she lashed out and killed them. But that's not what the evidence proved.
They were bad, because they were going to hurt me. This person was either going to physically beat me up, rape me, or kill me. I don't know which one. And I just turned around and did my fair play before I would get hurt.
It's a confirmation of what happened. She killed these men, but she was in fear of her life. But you know what? At least it's a start. We were able to recover the gun. We were able to recover some of the items that had been stolen based on her statement. And we were able to find where she hid her souvenirs. And what had happened was she carried this little briefcase with her. And she was very protective of it. We went ahead and got a search warrant. We opened up the briefcase and we found a roll of paper towels, a bottle of Windex, and a receipt for one of those mini storage sheds that you can rent. And when we went in there was property from 6 of the 7 victims. The one that we didn't find anything from was the first one, Richard Mallory.
Investigators had to figure out why Richard Mallory's murder didn't seem to fit the same pattern as the others.
There's been multiple accounts as to what really happened in that case. And some of those accounts have come from Aileen Wuornos herself.
While Aileen was a predator later on, when she started killing some more, with Richard Mallory it was a little different. He was heading to Daytona. She was hitchhiking to Daytona. He picked her up hitchhiking. They were drinking, they were hanging out, as it were, and one thing led to another, some type of violent encounter where she ended up killing him. So that was a really different set of circumstances than we saw with the other men. She shot him 4 times with a 9-shot revolver. She took a couple of pieces of property that belonged to him, a camera and a radar detector, and she pawned them. She made some money off of the deal. And what happened after that, and this is typical of our serial killers, is that she went into hibernation. So there's usually what they call a brief cooling off period. And this absolutely applied here. It was about 6 months before she killed again. And a large part of it was due to her paranoia and her fear of getting caught and not knowing, what law enforcement involvement was. And when she came back from that brief cooling off period, now she was the predator, she was the killer, she was the serial killer.
What we have learned from the confession of Lee Wuornos, that she would be hitchhiking.
She would pick up men as they stopped to help her, and then she would take them somewhere and kill them and take their money, or take whatever value they had.
And with each victim, the rage increased a little bit more. David Spears was shot 6 times. The victim after that, Charles Kascaden, was shot 9 times. She actually emptied the gun out at him. You try and look at what a motive would be. You try and find out what it could be. And there were a lot of interviews done with her, not just police interviews, but the psychological interviews. And because she kept going back and forth on why she did what she did, it's really not clear. There's 2 sides of the story there. And in one side, she's the cold-blooded killer. She had said, I robbed them and I killed them so they couldn't identify me. And then there's the other side of her that says, I was the victim and I was only defending myself.
During their time with Aileen Wuornos, investigators discovered more about her life.
While we can't blame these killings on her childhood, she grew up in an environment that no child should have to. She never knew her father. He was a convicted criminal that was in prison. Her mother didn't want her. Her mother abandoned her when she was 5 months old. So she was raised by her grandparents, but they didn't want her. They didn't feel they should be responsible for her. So she was treated very harshly.
She was surviving, and she was a survivalist, and she knew how to wake up each day. She took care of herself. When she was very young, before she got to her teen years, she was known as a cigarette bandit. And the reason being was that she would trade sexual favors for packs of cigarettes.
Her grandfather had a home-built sauna in his house. And if he wanted to punish her for doing something he didn't like, he'd lock her in the sauna and crank up the heat and just let her stay in there. So by about the age of 11 or 12, she's out on her own. And she's now starting to get more involved in drinking and in sex. And she never had a family to support her. It just wasn't there. In her mind, she thinks everybody's leaving me. My mother left me and my grandparents, they didn't want me. Her grandfather committed suicide the same year that her brother died. She liked her brother, but what happened with him is that he died of throat cancer at the age of 20. So that one bond that she might have had went away at a pretty early age as well.
There are allegations that she was sexually abused as a young child. When she was very young, she did become pregnant. She gave birth, and before she left the hospital, that baby was removed from her, and the baby was given up to adoption.
Detectives discovered that Wuornos' first victim, Richard Mallory, had a criminal record that may have been the catalyst for her crimes.
Now, there was some information that Richard Mallory had been involved in a sexual assault at some point years ago up in Maryland. And there are those that believe that they may have come into play, and it's entirely possible. Again, there's a lot of speculation. It could be that she hated her grandfather and she wanted to lash out and maybe kill him over and over. Or maybe she was killing Richard Mallory over and over when she lined up these other victims. But it's this aspect of her life where she thinks, nobody wants me. They're all doing this because they don't want me. And that was ultimately what led to her confessing, was because when she found Tyria Moore and she developed a relationship with her, she wanted to keep that relationship going. And she said, I would do anything for this girl. The only case Aileen went to trial on was the death of Richard Mallory in Volusia County. She never thought Tyria would turn against her. She never thought Tyria would testify against her. And that was absolutely devastating. When Aileen went to court and Tyria testified, she was absolutely devastated. She stood trial, she testified, she got convicted and sentenced to death. Now, one of the odd twists of this whole thing, after being sentenced for Richard Mallory's death, she elected to plead guilty for 5 other counts of first-degree murder, and she accepted the death penalty without going to trial, which is a very unusual thing to happen. But that was why we only had 1 trial. She really just wanted to get it over with. She didn't want to go to trial again. She didn't want to sit in that courtroom. She didn't want to face Tyria.
Aileen Wuornos was given a total of 6 death sentences. She wasn't charged with anything in connection to Peter Sims. His body has never been found.
While Aileen was in prison, we took her out on 3 different occasions. So she was taken out of prison and driven to different locations where she thought she might have dumped his body. And all 3 of those trips resulted in no results. Her last interview, the night before she was executed, she started out talking all happy and joyful, and then it was like somebody flipped a switch on her. She just started going nuts. So there's a lot of emotion there, and I don't think she knows how to control it. Either way, good or bad. It's either the extreme on one end or the extreme on the other.
Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection on October the 9th, 2002. She was 46 years old.
There was no sympathy, she was just a ruthless, mean bitch that killed us still.
She shot them multiple times. She left these victims basically in the middle of nowhere. And to do that to another human being, there's zero compassion.
She has no sense of right or wrong. She goes by her own standards. So if she takes a life, to her, it's just another day.
Well, she was evil. She was pure evil.
We hope you enjoyed this video on the life and crimes of the Damsel of Death, Aileen Wuornos. Click the video or playlist on screen now to see more of our content on the world's most evil killers. And don't forget to hit the subscribe and like buttons down below. Make sure to turn on that notification bell to be the first to watch a new true crime story. Thanks for watching. See you next time.